Welcome to Little Blossom, a werewolf fated mate romance, where fate is messy, the sparks are wild, and the full moon brings more than fur and fangs. There's snark, steam, and a mate bond neither of them asked for, but can't escape. Buckle up, pack! From haunted hearts to ancient curses, you'll find stories here that pull you in and don't let go. If you're into tales that twist the real and the unreal, you're in the right place. Nyxen Audiobooks. Hit that subscribe button, and let's dive in. The snow came down like a vengeful deity, determined to erase the world, to bury every color and sound under a thick, white shroud. Wren stumbled through it, each step a brutal negotiation with the elements. Her thin coat, soaked through and stiff with ice, dragged like dead weight, a constant reminder of her vulnerability. The icy wind whipped at her exposed skin, turning her hands a ghastly blue, each finger a frozen twig. Her lips cracked with every shallow breath, and the taste of copper coated her tongue. Blood smeared her palms, a burning reminder of the thorns that had clawed at her desperate flight. But she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. If she stopped, the silence would catch up again, a silence far more terrifying than the storm. She wasn't sure how long she'd been gone. A day? 2? Time had blurred into a relentless cycle of freezing, running, and the haunting echo of her aunt's voice. It had taken her aunt less than a week after the funerals to start calling her a problem, a burden. Wren remembered the pinched, disapproving set of her mouth, the way her eyes narrowed whenever Wren was in sight. Her uncle said less, but his silence was a weapon in itself. When he looked at her, it was like she'd personally dug her parents' graves, each glance a silent accusation of guilt. Her aunt hit her every day, across her shoulders, arms and back, always in the same spot. They didn't speak to her, not during, not after. They starved her with silence and cold stares, rationing out the barest necessities like she was a stray animal they were obligated to tolerate, not cherish. The ever-present draft in her bedroom had become a permanent fixture, chilling her bones. They fed her the idea that she was lucky to be clothed in cast-offs, lucky to be ignored rather than actively tormented. "You're not ours," her aunt had spat once, the words like acid on Wren's skin, after Wren spilled a glass of milk, a rare treat that made the spillage all the more egregious. "We already raised our own. Your parents left you. Why should we do more?" She was 16 then, already shrinking, already learning to make herself invisible. Now, 19 and alone, she was finally doing what they always said she should, leaving. But the woods were cruel in winter, an uncaring landscape of ice and shadows, and Wren's body so long used to staying small and quiet, to conserving every calorie and breath wasn't built for escape. Her legs burned with the protest of muscles pushed beyond their limit. Her throat ached from crying without sound, the silent sobs a constant companion. She hadn't spoken in months, maybe a year. No one had noticed, or if they had, it brought only indifference. And now, no one would find her or care if she disappeared. She fell in the snow, her knees slamming against the hard, frozen ground beneath the deceptive powder. A jolt of pain shot up her spine, stealing her breath. Her body slumped sideways, the frigid ground leaching away what little warmth she had left. The cold bit deeper than fear ever had, a creeping numbness that threatened to consume her. Then, a shadow fell across her face. She blinked up through snow-drenched lashes, trying to fight off the encroaching darkness, and saw movement, not a hallucination born from exhaustion and despair. Real, tall, steady. A man. No, a wolf first, a flicker of primal instinct in his posture. Then a man. The shift happening even as he stepped through the trees toward her. She thought, briefly, that she might die in his arms, and somehow that was okay, as if it was her destiny. But the man knelt beside her, his face a blur against the grey sky, and his voice was nothing like death, but a warm and comforting rumble. "You're all right now. I've got you." She woke to warmth, a sensation so foreign it felt like a dream. Warmth wasn't something Wren remembered, not as anything other than a distant memory. She'd slept in cold basements, the concrete floor radiating a chill that seeped into her bones. Attics, where the wind howled through cracks in the eaves. Hallways near drafty windows, huddled under threadbare blankets. Not here. Not in something that smelled like clean linen and cedar, a scent that evoked a forgotten memory of her mother's embrace. She blinked up at a wooden ceiling, cross-beamed and old, the patterns in the wood, a comforting geometry. Her body was wrapped in thick quilts, their weight a gentle pressure against her aching limbs. She tried to move, winced at the sharp ache in her shoulder, but it was dulled now, manageable, easy. The voice came from nearby, a low, calming timbre that resonated in her chest. Her eyes snapped sideways. A man sat in a chair beside the hearth, tending something in a pot. The firelight danced on his face, casting flickering shadows across his features. He turned at her movement, but didn't rise, didn't approach, just looked, his gaze steady and assessing. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his presence filling the room without being overwhelming. Quiet in the way mountains are quiet, not because they lack power, but because they have nothing left to prove. Dark hair, slightly disheveled, warm skin, tanned by the sun and wind. Sweater sleeves pushed to his elbows, revealing strong forearms with pale scars running through them like history, etched into his flesh. But it was his eyes that stopped her, holding her captive. Not sharp, not cold, just watchful, like a guardian. "You've been out almost a full day," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. Wren didn't speak. She couldn't. The words locked inside her. He didn't seem surprised, only accepting. "You don't have to talk. Not here." He turned back to the pot, ladled something into a mug, then stood and set it on the table beside her bed. "It's just tea." For shock. Then he backed away. Not out of the room, just far enough to give her the space she didn't know how to ask for. A silent understanding of her fragile state. "My name's Asa. You're safe now." That last part. Safe. She didn't believe it. Couldn't. Not yet. Years of ingrained fear couldn't be erased by a single act of kindness. But she didn't feel cold. Not anymore. And when she looked at him again, he was already turning back to the fire, his movements unhurried and deliberate, leaving her alone, not because she didn't matter, but because he could tell she needed it. The fire whispered in the hearth, warm and low, casting flickering amber light over the walls of the small den. The cabin was small but meticulously kept, every surface gleaming with a layer of beeswax polish. The scent of pine and wood smoke intertwined with the subtle sweetness of dried herbs hanging from the rafters. The stone of the hearth radiated heat, chasing away the lingering chill of the snow. Wren stirred beneath the heavy quilt, its wool thick and scratchy, but wonderfully warm against her skin. Her breath was shallow, ragged. Her head ached, her limbs stiff, but the pain was muted as if dulled by something stronger than time. She pushed herself upright, carefully. The blankets slipped from her shoulders, revealing a thin cotton shift, and that's when he saw them. From across the room, Asa turned at the sound of movement, just in time to catch a glimpse of her collarbone, her upper arm, bruises, old and new. Shadows painted across pale skin like fingerprints left too long. He didn't move closer, didn't suck in a breath or clench his jaw like most would. He just looked, quieter. "It's warm in here," he said softly, "but you don't have to take the blanket off unless you want to." Wren froze, one hand gripping the edge of the blanket. Then, slowly, she pulled it back around herself, wrapping it tightly again. Her heart thumped like footsteps behind her. She reached with trembling fingers for the mug of tea beside the bed. It was still warm, the ceramic smooth and comforting against her cold hands. The scent hit her first chamomile, a whisper of mint, and something gently earthy beneath it. She sipped. The liquid slid down her throat, leaving warmth in its wake. It didn't taste like anything she knew. It tasted like safety. Across the room, Asa crouched near the fire. He stirred a second pot, slower now, the metal spoon clinking softly against the ceramic, as if giving her space to choose silence. "Miss Leaf brewed that for you," he said quietly. "Helps calm the body." "She's my healer." Wren didn't respond. She set the mug down carefully, her fingers aching. He stood then, slow and deliberate, and walked to a small sideboard. The wood was dark and worn, its surface etched with the faint patterns of countless spilled liquids. When he returned, he wasn't carrying more food or blankets. He held a blackboard. Worn wood, smoothed by years of use. The slate was dark and inviting. A piece of chalk was tied to the corner with thin twine, the rough fibers contrasting with the smooth, cool surface of the board. The scent of dust and aged wood rose to her nostrils. She imagined the countless words and images that had graced its surface, the stories it held silent witness to. "I thought this might help," Asa said. He set it gently on the table beside her, within reach, not pushing it into her lap, not assuming, just placing it there, like an offering. Sometimes it's easier not to talk. Sometimes it's not about the throat at all. She stared at the board. No one had ever offered her a different way to speak. Not once. Her aunt used to say, "If you won't use your mouth, don't expect us to read your mind." Her uncle didn't speak to her at all. But Asa, he gave her options. He made room for silence. Wren's hand hovered over the chalk, unsure. The chalk dust tickled her nose, a strange and unfamiliar sensation. She could almost feel the rough texture against her fingertips, the potential for creation and communication it held. Then she dropped it back into her lap. "Not yet." He nodded like he understood, even without words. "I'll leave it here. If you want to use it, use it. If not, that's all right too." He stepped away, moving toward the hearth again, sat down in the chair by the fire and folded his arms loosely, not looking at her now. "Your coat wasn't made for snow," he said after a pause. "Thin lining, wrong color. You've been out there a while." She flinched slightly. He caught it but didn't comment. "I'm guessing you walked," he added, "from the human border." She didn't nod. She didn't deny it either. "Did anyone know you were gone?" Asa asked gently. Wren's fingers tightened around the blanket. He looked over slow, careful just enough to meet her eyes. "You don't have to answer," he said. "I'm just trying to understand how alone you feel." Something cracked then. Just a little. Not a sound. Not a sob. But her shoulders trembled, and the mug rattled slightly in her hand before she set it down. Asa stood. "I'll bring food. You need something solid in you." She didn't look at him. She couldn't. But when he returned with the bowl of stew, she was still sitting up, still awake, and her eyes flicked to the blackboard. Just once. He noticed. Didn't say a word. Just set the bowl down, nodded, and moved to the far side of the room. Asa was quiet, unassuming. The kind of presence that didn't lean in, didn't take up space unless it was offered. And in that silence, in the warmth of the hearth and the scratch of her heartbeat in her ears, Wren breathed. A little deeper, a little steadier. She was still broken. But maybe not, beyond repair. The forest outside Iron Hollow stirred beneath the grey sky. Wolves moved through the pines like whispers, their paws silent over wet earth and melting snow. This was not the wild chaos of rogue territory, nor the rigid patrols of the northern packs. Iron Hollow moved differently, because its alpha had shaped it that way. Asa stood at the ridge above the main pack clearing, arms folded across his chest, eyes distant. He watched the wolves below with a familiar aconite, sadness exactly, but distance, like staring at a life you used to belong to. He'd built this, brick by weary brick. Children chased each other between drying laundry lines. Young scouts prepared for their run-checking blades, adjusting their cloaks, eager, bright-eyed. He remembered that feeling, vaguely. Elder wolves huddled over a fire pit discussing the coming thaw. Their aches, their wisdom. They deserved this peace. They were strong, safe, stable, because he had made them that way. "You look like a ghost up there," came a voice beside him. Asa didn't turn. "You always sneak up on me, Joran. Only when you're brooding." Which is, what, 5 times a day now? Asa gave him a sideways look. The beta grinned, all rough charm and sandpaper humor. Joran was younger by a few years, but had earned his place through loyalty and grit. He was the pack's teeth and tongue, Asa's voice, when Asa didn't want to speak. "You haven't been down to the main house in days," Joran said, not bothering to mask the concern. "The elders are starting to ask questions again." "Let them ask. They're saying she's a rogue, that she could be dangerous. She's not. You don't know that." Asa looked away. The wind brushed through the evergreens. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried. "I know fear when I see it," he said. "She's not here to take anything. Not like they did. Maybe not. But the longer you keep her tucked away, the more it stirs things up. You haven't had anyone in your house since—" He didn't finish the sentence. Asa didn't need him to. "I'm not bringing her into the pack house. Not yet. She's not ready. And neither are they. And when she is, then we talk about it." Joran sighed. "You know I trust you. But you're the alpha. You can't live in the trees forever." "I'm not hiding," Asa said evenly. "No. You're waiting." A pause. "But for what, Asa?" Asa didn't answer. "For a spark. For a sign. For her to choose." Later, in the healing hut, Mistleaf crushed dried star blossom into a thick paste with slow, deliberate motions. Her hands moved with the precision of someone who'd been doing this for decades. The air hung thick with the scent of herbs, a familiar comfort to Asa. "How bad?" she asked as Asa stepped through the threshold. "Old bruises," he said. "Some newer, deep ones, across her arms and back. She keeps them covered." Miss Leaf's eyes tightened, a flicker of something sharp and dangerous crossing her face. Her hands stilled for a fraction of a second, a nearly imperceptible tremor. She knew what those kinds of bruises meant. Too well. But she nodded, her expression smoothing over, professional once more. She was the rock of the pack, never rash. "She let you see them?" "She didn't mean to." The blanket slipped. "Did she flinch when you looked?" "No." "That's something," Miss Leaf murmured. A sliver of defiance, perhaps. Or resignation. Which was worse? She scooped the mixture into a small jar. "This'll help the deeper bruising." "And her throat?" Asa stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Still no words. But I left her something, a blackboard. She didn't use it, but she looked at it." Miss Leaf smiled faintly. "Then she's thinking. That's more than most do, this early." She handed him the jar. "You need to start bringing her around others, Asa. She needs a connection. And the pack. The pack will make her feel like a spectacle, like she is something to be studied rather than a person. The pack will watch how you treat her. They will follow your lead." He nodded, reluctantly. He knew she was right, but his instincts still screamed at him to protect, to isolate. That evening, Asa walked through the heart of Iron Hollow, nodding to those who bowed or glanced his way. He felt their eyes on him, the unspoken questions. They were waiting, watching. He spoke little, offered calm where it was needed, but always returned to the edge of the territory when night fell. He always needed to return. To the cabin. To her. Inside, Wren was asleep on the couch, a blanket tucked under her chin, the fire throwing gold across her face. Beside her, on the table, the blackboard had been moved, not used. but touched. The chalk was in a different place. A silent question, a tentative step. Ace's eyes softened. "You're still in there," he whispered. He sat in the chair across from her, watching the fire die. He could feel the weight of his pack, the expectation, the need for leadership. But here, in this quiet space, with this broken woman, he felt to purpose. And for a man who had once ruled from the center of a pack, he didn't mind waiting on the edge anymore. The wind howled outside Ace's cabin, brushing snow against the windows like a memory that refused to melt. Inside, the fire burned low, casting flickering shadows that danced across the rough-hewn walls. Wren sat curled on the couch, legs drawn to her chest, the quilt tucked securely under her chin. She watched the flames not for warmth, though the cabin was undeniably cold, but for rhythm. For predictability, fire was the only thing that didn't ask anything of her, didn't demand explanations or performances. She could feel him in the room, not watching her, exactly, just nearby. His presence was a low hum in the air, comforting and unnerving in equal measure. Asa was chopping vegetables in the kitchen space, sleeves rolled up to reveal the corded muscles of his forearms, blade rising and falling with a steady, almost hypnotic rhythm. He hadn't spoken in over 20 minutes. He didn't need to. Silence had become their shared language, a buffer against the sharp edges of the world. But tonight, it itched beneath her skin, a silent scream trapped in her throat. She wanted to ask something. She wanted to say something, to bridge the chasm that stretched between them, but her throat was locked, and her voice wasn't ready to be born. The words felt like shards of glass, painful to even think about. Her eyes drifted to the small table near the hearth, the blackboard, still there, still untouched. A stark rectangle of possibility and terror. She shifted, the worn springs of the couch groaning in protest. Her heart beat faster, a frantic drum against her ribs. The simple act of looking at the board brought a wave of anxiety. If I touch it, she thought, a silent mantra that echoed in her mind. I can't take it back. I'll be seen. Her hand reached slowly, hesitantly, as if testing the waters. The blanket slipped slightly from her shoulder, revealing the pale, fragile curve of her collarbone. Her fingers hovered inches from the board's frame, trembling slightly. It was just a board, a simple object. But it represented something more. A chance to communicate, to be understood, to risk vulnerability. And vulnerability felt like standing naked in the Arctic wind. Finally, she made contact and brushed the rough wood of the frame. She pulled the board into her lap, cradling it as if it were made of glass, terrified of shattering the fragile hope it represented. Asa didn't stop chopping, but he paused just briefly, the movement of his hand faltering for a fraction of a second and then resumed his task. He'd seen her move. He'd registered her intention, the silent plea in her eyes, and he was letting her do it her way, allowing her the space and the time she needed to find her voice. She stared at the chalk, a stubby white cylinder that felt heavier than lead in her trembling hand. She picked it up. The sound of it on slate was quiet, almost timid, a faint scratching that echoed in the stillness of the cabin. She wrote, "How long can I stay?" The question hung in the air, a fragile plea for permanence in a life defined by impermanence. Then she froze. The chalk still pressed against the board, leaving a faint, almost imperceptible line. Every second stretched out like a thread pulled too tight, threatening to snap. Shame washed over her. Was she imposing? Was she a burden? The kindness he had shown her felt undeserved, a fragile gift she was afraid of breaking. She didn't look up, didn't dare to meet his gaze. Not until she heard the chopping stop, the sudden silence amplifying the frantic beat of her own heart. Asa walked over slow, deliberate, each footstep measured and careful, and crouched beside the couch. Not too close, invading her personal space. Not looming, casting a shadow of judgment. He read the question, his brow furrowed slightly in concentration. Then he looked at her, his eyes a deep, fathomless grey, his voice quiet but sure. As long as you want to. Wren's fingers tightened around the chalk, her knuckles white. His answer, so simple and direct, was both a comfort and a challenge. Did she want to stay? Could she even allow herself to want anything anymore? Her shoulders shook once, a small, convulsive movement, like her ribs were trying to remember how to breathe, how to expand and contract without pain. She erased the question, the chalk squeaking against the slate, obliterating the words as quickly as they had appeared. Wrote something new, something that felt closer to the truth, even if it was still shrouded in fear. I don't want to be a problem. Asa settled lower onto the rug, sitting cross-legged, his posture relaxed but attentive. You're not a problem, he said softly, his voice a low, soothing rumble. You're a person. He paused, letting the words sink in, allowing her the time to process their weight. Then, his voice dropped even gentler, almost a whisper. Can I ask your name? Her hand hovered for a second above the board, paralyzed by indecision. Her name felt like a brand, a mark of ownership, something that could be used against her. If I tell him I'm real, then I can be hurt. But she looked at his face, saw the genuine warmth in his eyes, the absence of any judgment. Then she slowly lowered the chalk and wrote, Wren. Asa read it. His gaze lingered on the simple word. Inside, a quiet warmth spread through him, a fragile hope blossoming in the barren landscape of his heart. Wren. It was a small thing, a whisper of identity offered tentatively, but it was a start. It was a sign that she was willing to trust him, to let him see a sliver of the person hidden beneath the layers of fear and trauma. He felt a surge of protectiveness, a fierce desire to shield her from the pain that had shaped her. He tamped it down, reminding himself that she needed space, not smothering. His expression didn't change no surprise, not pity, not even relief, just a quiet nod, a subtle acknowledgement, like he was tucking the name into a special place in his memory, a place that mattered. Wren, he said aloud, testing the sound of it, gently, reverently. It suits you. She blinked hard, a single tear escaping and tracing a path down her cheek. No one had ever said her name like that, like it was something worth having, something beautiful and precious. It had always been a shout, a curse, a label, never a kindness. She looked down, unable to meet his gaze, overwhelmed by the unexpected wave of emotion. Another pause. Then she added something beneath it. I don't feel real. His voice came without hesitation, without any trace of condescension or disbelief. That's okay. I didn't either, for a long time. That made her head lift, her eyes snapping back to his, searching his face for any sign of deception. He wasn't lying. She could see the truth in the depths of his eyes, the remnants of his pain and loss. After my mate died, Asa said quietly, the words heavy with unspoken grief, I lived up here like a ghost. The pack kept going, but I didn't want anything. No connection. No purpose. He glanced toward the fire, his gaze distant, lost in the shadows of his past, then back at her, steady, unflinching. But broken things don't scare me. Wren's lips parted, forming a silent, oh. No sound came out, but something moved inside her chest. A slow, hesitant stirring. Like the first breath after almost drowning. A fragile gasp of hope that fluttered in the darkness. She didn't write anything else that night, but she left the blackboard by her pillow when she went to bed. A silent offering, a fragile bridge between their worlds. And in the morning, when she woke to the sound of Asa making tea, the clinking of cups and the gentle hum of his presence, she reached for it again, a flicker of anticipation warming the coldness inside her. The silence wasn't so frightening anymore. The snow had begun to melt. It dripped steadily from the eaves of the cabin, a rhythmic plink, plink, plink that echoed in the otherwise silent clearing. The water pooled in tiny, meandering rivulets along the stone path just outside the porch, reflecting the muted sky like fragments of a shattered mirror. The sky itself was still grey, but a softer grey now. The harsh, biting tones of midwinter softened with a hint of promise. It was as if winter had exhaled a long, weary breath and stepped aside, yielding, if only momentarily. Inside, Wren stood at the door, her hand resting against the rough-hewn frame. The blanket around her shoulders had slipped a little, threatening to pool on the floor, but she didn't fix it. Her eyes were locked on the view beyond the glass window pane. Outside, the forest called. Not with any discernible noise, not a rustle or a creak. It called with space, with the vast, silent invitation of the open air. Room to breathe the damp, earthy scent. Room to move limbs that had grown stiff and restless. She didn't realize Asa was behind her until he spoke. "You want to go out?" His voice wasn't a question so much as an invitation, a gentle offering. Wren didn't move, her back still to him, but her fingers, pale and slender, curled slightly against the weathered wood of the doorframe, a silent plea. She turned, just enough to glance at the blackboard on the side table, her gaze lingering on the simple slate, as if it held the secrets of the universe. Asa followed her gaze, his expression unreadable. "You don't have to ask," he said gently, his voice a soothing balm. "It's your body, your choice. I'll walk with you, if you want." She hesitated, her internal struggle etched on her face. Then, with a decisive move, she picked up the chalk, the cool, gritty texture familiar beneath her fingers, and wrote, "Not far." "Not far," Asa agreed readily, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Just around the clearing? To the stream, perhaps?" She nodded, a small, slow movement, but it held a world of meaning. Then, she bundled the blanket tighter around herself, drawing strength from its familiar weight, and stepped outside for the first time in weeks. The wind met her like an old, slightly gruff friend chill. Yes, but not cruel. It nipped at her exposed skin, a refreshing sting after the stale air of the cabin. She blinked up at the sky, her eyes adjusting to the diffused light. There were no wolves in sight, no ominous shadows lurking in the trees, just the familiar silhouettes of bare branches against the grey expanse. The path, etched in shadow and light, and Asa standing silently beside her, a reassuring presence. Her boot soles misleaf had found in the stores, slightly too large but padded, with thick socks scrunched softly against the damp earth, each step a small, triumphant rebellion against the silence of her confinement. She stepped forward cautiously, unsure of the ground beneath her feet, testing her weight before committing. But the moment her foot touched the frost-soaked moss that clung tenaciously to the base of a towering pine, something shifted. It was small, unseen by an outside observer, but the grass beneath the thin layer of ice didn't wilt, as it should have in the biting cold. Instead, it brightened, a subtle shift towards a warmer, richer green, just a little, as if the forest itself exhaled in relief at her return, accepting her back into its embrace. She didn't notice the subtle shift in the landscape. Her focus was still on the simple act of walking, of putting one foot in front of the other. But Asa did. He saw the subtle verdant glow, the almost imperceptible pulse of life that emanated from the ground beneath her feet. He kept his observations to himself, a secret shared only with the ancient trees. They walked in silence, a comfortable, companionable silence. Around the clearing they went, skirting the edges of the dense woods, down to the small stream, still rimmed in delicate, crystalline ice. Wren paused there, drawn to the murmuring sound of the water as it flowed over smooth, worn stones. Birdsong trickled through the branches above them unexpected, a joyful surprise this early in the season. The melody was light and airy, a hopeful counterpoint to the somber landscape. A pair of robins, their breasts a vibrant splash of orange against the muted colors of the forest, landed nearby on a snow-dusted branch. One chirped once, a clear, melodic call, then hopped closer, just a few feet from where she stood, its bright, inquisitive eyes fixed on her. Wren stared, captivated by their unexpected appearance. "They don't usually come this low," Asa murmured, his voice hushed with awe. She turned to look at him, uncertain, a question forming on her lips. "It's nothing bad," he added quickly, seeing the flicker of apprehension in her eyes. "Just uncommon, special perhaps." She crouched slowly by the water's edge, listening to the gentle gurgle of the stream, breathing in the earthy scent of thawing pine needles and damp moss. The aroma filled her lungs, a welcome change from the sterile atmosphere of the cabin. Something in her chest loosened, the tight knot of anxiety and fear beginning to unravel. Not all the way. Not yet. But a thread had been pulled, a small space created for hope to blossom. When they walked back to the cabin, her steps were slower, more deliberate. Not from exhaustion, but because she was looking now, truly seeing the world around her, at the bare branches, reaching towards the sky like skeletal fingers. The way the snow clung to the bark in intricate patterns, glittering in the weak sunlight before letting go in a soft, sighing cascade. At the small buds, not yet blooming, but beginning to swell, to wake from their winter slumber, promising a future bursting with life and colour. That night, she wrote on the blackboard without him prompting her, her hand steady and sure. "I liked the birds." Asa smiled, a warm, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "They liked you." She stared at him, brow furrowed in confusion. He didn't explain, didn't try to put into words the almost magical connection he had witnessed. She didn't press, trusting that she would understand in her own time, but as she lay in bed later, curled beneath the heavy quilts, her eyes stayed open just a little longer, gazing out at the moonlit forest. And outside the cabin, bathed in the silvery glow, the first crocus weeks too early, defying the natural order, pushed through the frost and opened its delicate petals to the cold, silent moonlight, a testament to the awakening power within her. The dream came with smoke, not fire, not heat, just ash, grey flakes, like spectral snow, drifting through a sky the colour of a fading bruise. Beneath it, a forest burned not red or orange, the colours of life, but pale, cold flame, like frost catching fire. The air tasted acrid, a metallic tang coating Wren's tongue. She stood in the centre, barefoot on cracked earth that offered no comfort against its sharp edges. Her hair moved in a wind she couldn't feel, a phantom breeze that whispered of loss. Around her, figures gathered, shadow wolves. Their forms were indistinct, swallowed by the grey, but their presence was undeniable. They didn't growl, they didn't move. They simply watched with eyes like chips of obsidian, reflecting the ghostly flames. And in her hands, cupped and trembling, as if offering a sacrifice, glowed a single white ember, bright, alive, beating like a heart against her palm, its warmth a stark contrast to the icy air. She tried to speak, tried to call out to the wolves, to the forest, to anyone. But her mouth moved, formed the shapes of unspoken words, and nothing came, only silence, a suffocating, absolute silence that pressed against her eardrums. And then, from the forest edge, a voice no hers, deep and resonant echoed through the smoke, cutting through the void. "You are not meant to speak. You are meant to shine." When Wren woke, her pillow was damp, clinging to her cheek with a cold, uncomfortable clamminess. Her hands ached, the muscles screaming in protest from where she'd clutched the blanket, her knuckles white. The morning sun filtered through the window, pale and thin, offering little warmth or comfort. And Miss Leaf was sitting beside her. The healer always moved like root slow, quiet, wise. Her long grey braid, smelling faintly of herbs and wood smoke, hung over one shoulder, and her eyes, the colour of moss agate, held the same warmth as Aza's, only sharper, less patient, more knowing. "Good," Miss Leaf said softly, her voice rustling like dry leaves, placing a cool hand to Wren's forehead. The touch was surprisingly gentle. "You're awake. I've been meaning to check on that throat." Wren tensed, a knot of anxiety tightening in her chest. Her eyes flicked to the blackboard, its surface a familiar comfort. "It still hurts sometimes." Miss Leaf read it and nodded, her gaze lingering on the words as if searching for something more. "Not uncommon, and not unnatural, but I'd like to try something if you'll allow it." Wren studied her, searching for any hint of deceit or false hope in the healer's expression. Finding none, she nodded once, a small, hesitant movement. Miss Leaf pulled out a small wooden jar, its surface worn smooth with age, swirling with a faintly shimmering green balm. The aroma was earthy and sweet, a blend of forest floor and blooming flowers. "This was taught to me by a forest clan far south," she explained, removing the lid. The scent intensified, filling the small space with a sense of ancient magic. "It doesn't just heal, it reveals. If there's something inside the body that resists natural balance, this will show us." She warmed a bit of the balm in her hands, the pale green substance softening and releasing its potent fragrance. Then, with infinite care, she gently brushed her fingertips over Wren's throat, not pressing, just laying the balm like paint across her skin, a feather-like touch that sent a shiver down Wren's spine. It was warm at first, a soothing heat that eased the ever-present ache. Then, cold, a sudden, sharp chill that made Wren gasp. She flinched as something prickled beneath the surface, 1,000 tiny needles dancing across her skin. Her breath caught in her lungs, a silent scream trapped in her chest. The balm shimmered faintly, and a pulse of soft white light followed Miss Leaf's touch, illuminating the healer's face with an ethereal glow. The old woman's face shifted, her brow furrowing with concern. She didn't speak right away, her silence amplifying Wren's growing fear. Wren sat up straighter, her heart pounding against her ribs, eyes wide with a mixture of hope and dread. Miss Leaf exhaled, a long, slow release of breath, then looked toward the door. "Aza!" she called gently, her voice carrying a weight Wren couldn't decipher. He appeared almost instantly, his presence filling the doorway. His eyes, usually calm and reassuring, flicked between the two women, his expression unreadable. "What is it?" Miss Leaf sat back, wiping her hands on a cloth, her movements deliberate and precise. Her vocal cords are damaged, scarred, deeply. Some of the tissue has calcified, likely from repeated strain, screaming, injury, and neglect. If she had spoken recently, it would have hurt like fire. Ace's face didn't change, but something in his shoulders dropped, a subtle shift that betrayed his inner turmoil. "Can it be healed?" Miss Leaf hesitated, her gaze locked on Wren, a silent apology in her eyes. "Not with anything I know. Not fully. Perhaps eased. Perhaps softened. But not restored." She looked at Wren, meeting her gaze directly. She may never speak again. Silence. Heavy and suffocating. The air in the room seemed to thicken, making it difficult to breathe. Wren sat still, her hands balled in the blankets, her nails digging into her palms. A wave of numbness washed over her, followed by a sharp, searing pain that threatened to overwhelm her. She didn't cry. Tears threatened to spill, but she refused to let them fall. She didn't shake. Her body remained rigid, locked in a state of shock. She just breathed once, deeply, pulling the air into her lungs with a ragged gasp, and then looked at Asa, seeking solace in his familiar presence. He stepped forward slowly, his movements deliberate and gentle. Sat beside her, close enough for her to feel the warmth radiating from his body. And without asking, he picked up the blackboard. He turned it toward her, the slate cool against her fingertips, and wrote in his careful hand, "You don't have to speak to be heard," then handed her the chalk, its weight grounding her. She stared at the message, the words blurring through the haze of her despair. A single tear escaped, tracing a path down her cheek. After a moment, she wiped it away and added beneath it, "It's okay." The chalk scratched against the slate, the sound strangely comforting in the quiet room. That night, she dreamt again. This time, the forest wasn't burning. It was blooming. Flowers of every conceivable color burst forth from the charred earth, their fragrance intoxicating. And all around her the shadow wolves howled, not in pain, in reverence. The sound was not mournful, but a chorus of praise, a celebration of the ember that still glowed within her. It started with moss. Not much, just a soft green patch where Wren had stepped barefoot the morning before. The ground around it was still dull with frost, but that single print was vibrant, thick with life. Asa noticed first. Of course he did. He was always watching, cataloguing the subtle shifts of the forest, the pulse of the earth. He crouched over the mark after she'd gone back inside, his breath misting in the cold air, brushing his fingers across the moss that had no business thriving this early in the season. A flicker of something akin to wonder, laced with a profound unease, passed through him. It shouldn't be here, he thought. Not yet, not at all. He tucked the observation away, a secret weight in his chest. He didn't say anything. Not yet. That afternoon, Wren sat beneath the twisted pine behind the cabin, the blackboard on her lap, legs stretched out to catch the faintest warmth from the sun. Asa worked nearby, chopping wood. Each swing of the axe was measured, deliberate, his gaze constantly straying towards her. He kept close, but not hovering, just present. It was the first time she'd willingly stayed outside this long. A breeze drifted through the trees. Her hair lifted, strands catching the light like spun gold. She closed her eyes, a small smile playing on her lips. When she opened them, she noticed something strange. Tiny white blossoms no larger than raindrops poking through the dead undergrowth just inches from her boots. She blinked. How? Tilted her head, her brow furrowed in gentle confusion. They hadn't been there a moment ago. She reached out, brushing her fingers over one. Its delicate petals felt surprisingly soft against her skin. It opened, just slightly, just for her. A wave of warmth, almost like a whispered greeting, washed over her. A faint, sweet fragrance, unlike anything she'd smelled before, filled the air. She traced the outline of a petal with her fingertip, a nascent curiosity blooming within her, a fragile tendril reaching out to the mystery that surrounded her. That evening, Miss Leaf returned with more balm and tea. She noticed the same moss near the door, a splash of vibrant green against the drab landscape. "Asa," she said as he handed her the kettle, her voice laced with a cautious curiosity. "How long has the ground been doing this?" He didn't answer right away. He watched the steam curl from the kettle's spout, avoiding her gaze. "It started yesterday, where she walks." Miss Leaf gave him a long, unreadable look. "You know what this might mean?" "I know what it looks like." "And what does it feel like?" Asa exhaled through his nose. He rubbed a hand over the back of his neck, the muscles tense beneath his skin. "It feels like the forest is breathing, like it knows her." Miss Leaf sat across from him, voice low. "We haven't seen signs of a lunar spirit since before my grandmother's time. It was a myth, even then." "Do you think it's her?" "I think the land thinks it is. That means something." The next day, Wren stepped beyond the clearing for the first time. Asa walked beside her, their pace slow. The trail was damp and narrow, shaded by bare branches overhead. Spring wasn't supposed to come for another 3 weeks, but as they walked, it followed them. Green leaves unfurled in slow motion from brittle branches. A vine curled over a rotted log and bloomed with soft yellow buds. Wren didn't notice, but Asa kept looking, watching the ground behind her, a growing sense of awe and trepidation warring within him. He saw the way the light shifted, the way the air seemed to shimmer in her wake. He felt it too, the palpable energy that radiated from her, almost humming against his skin. By the time they reached the river bend, the space where she stepped looked as if winter had been peeled back in her wake, and from the ridge above, 2 young scouts, Kesh and Bram, watched with wide eyes. "Do you see that?" Kesh whispered, crouching low. "That's her," Bram muttered. "The one staying with Asa. But look where she steps! That's not normal. Do you think she's a witch?" "No," Bram whispered. "I think she's something older." Wren returned to the cabin that evening, tired but peaceful. Her hair was dusted with pine needles, her cheeks a soft flush from sun and wind. She wrote one thing on the blackboard before curling up on the couch. It felt like the world was listening. Asa read it and just said, "It is." The statement hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning, a promise and a warning all in one. He knew this was only the beginning. The forest was waking up, and so was she. Word had spread like wildfire through the close-knit community of Iron Hollow. Every wolf within its boundaries had heard fractured tales of the silent girl the Alpha had brought down from the forest, a wraith-like figure who never spoke, who moved with the ethereal grace of smoke drifting through a snow-laden landscape, and who left a vibrant trail of green growing things in her wake. Beyond these whispers, details were scarce. They didn't need to be copious. The essence was clear. Wherever she went, the lingering frost retreated, and spring blossomed in her footsteps, like a shy creature tentatively emerging into the light. That afternoon, Asa stood beside her on the rough-hewn porch of his cabin. He offered no words of encouragement or explanation, merely extended his arm, presenting it with the quiet confidence that had become his hallmark. Wren hesitated for only the briefest of moments, a fleeting flicker of uncertainty in her eyes, before gently slipping her hand into the crook of his elbow. The gesture was subtle, yet undeniably deliberately a conscious act of acceptance. The first time she had willingly embraced touch on her terms. Together, they stepped down from the porch and began their journey toward the heart of the hollow. But as they neared the path where the clustered cabins gave way to the central gathering space, a primal instinct took hold. Without conscious thought, she released his arm and subtly decreased her pace, allowing herself to fall back into his shadow. It was a familiar space, a haven of anonymity and reduced visibility, safer, smaller, unseen. Asa continued walking for a few paces, his broad shoulders a comforting shield, then unexpectedly stopped. When she looked up at him in confusion, her brow furrowed with unspoken questions, he did not explain. He simply waited, radiating an unshakable patience. She studied his profile, the subtle tilt of his head, the unwavering calm reflected in his expression. Then, understanding slowly dawned, illuminating her features with a soft glow of comprehension. She stepped forward again, bridging the gap between them, reclaiming her place at his side, where he wanted her, where, perhaps, a part of her had always longed to be. Only then did he resume his walk, his pace unhurried, his presence a reassuring anchor. And this time, she stayed with him, her hand ghosting close to his arm, a silent promise of companionship. Iron Hollow was bustling with activity. Wolves moved purposefully through the wide spaces between the sturdy longhouses and crackling fire pits, engaged in a myriad of tasks, honing their combat skills, bartering goods, tending to playful pups. But as the pair came into view, a palpable shift rippled through the air. Conversations dwindled into hesitant murmurs, then faded away entirely. Heads turned, drawn by an invisible force. Eyes followed their progress, scrutinizing every detail. They had witnessed the Alpha walk this path countless times, his presence a familiar reassurance. But never like this. Never with a companion at his side, and never with a vibrant tapestry of wildflowers blooming in the wake of his companion's footsteps. It wasn't merely a dusting of moss or the occasional hardy violet, tenacious in their survival. The very ground beneath Wren's feet was awakening, pulsating with nascent life. Soft whites and sun-kissed yellows, new shoots pushing their way through the thawed earth, delicate petals unfurling as if summoned by an unseen hand. The path behind her glowed with an ethereal light, an early burst of verdant growth, undeniably real and utterly out of place in the nascent spring. A wave of silent awe washed over the assembled wolves. Some straightened, their spines rigid with surprised respect. Others whispered reverently, their voices hushed with disbelief. A few bowed their heads in instinctive reverence, their ears lowered in deference, not fully grasping the magnitude of what they were witnessing, yet knowing, deep within their primal instincts, that it held profound significance. Wren remained oblivious, or chose to remain so. She focused intently on the simple act of walking, on maintaining a steady rhythm of breath, on keeping her shoulders aligned, her posture unwavering. The air around her was thick with the scent of damp earth, blooming hyacinths, and the sharp tang of pine. If she noticed the explosion of color beneath her feet, she gave no sign. If she heard the hushed whispers that followed her every step, they failed to penetrate the protective barrier she had erected around herself. They passed the fire pit, the traditional gathering place for the Hollow's elders. Miss Leaf, her face etched with the wisdom of countless seasons, sat there, watching them with calm, unreadable eyes. She offered Asa a subtle nod of acknowledgement as they passed, her gaze flicking briefly to the riot of blossoms blooming beneath Wren's boots before returning to her contemplative reverie. The faint scent of wood smoke clung to the air, mingling with the sweeter aromas of the blossoming flowers. They reached the edge of the hollow, where the carefully planted wheat fields began, their golden rows still hesitant and fragile in their early spring stages. Wren drifted slightly toward the edge of the path, her fingers trailing lightly through the tops of the delicate stalks as they walked. The change was instantaneous and unmistakable. Where her fingers brushed against the tender wheat, the plants responded with an almost audible surge of energy. Not slowly, not subtly, but with a sudden, dramatic flourish. They flourished, shooting upward, becoming thicker and greener, rippling outward like a wave spreading across a serene lake. Dozens of rows swelled with vibrant new growth in a matter of seconds, the golden stalks straightening, strengthening, filling with life as though time itself bent and yielded in her presence. Gasps echoed behind them, a chorus of astonishment and disbelief. Some wolves stood frozen, their eyes wide with stunned wonder. Others stumbled forward, drawn by an irresistible curiosity, their faces etched with disbelief. A few dropped to one knee instinctively, their ears lowered in a gesture of submission, not quite understanding the forces at play, but deeply aware of the profound power they were witnessing. The earth itself seemed to hum with a newfound energy, a palpable sense of awakening. Wren never looked back. She continued walking steadily beside Asa, either unaware or perhaps unwilling to acknowledge the miraculous transformation unfolding behind her. Her focus remained fixed on the path ahead, her grip on the worn leather strap of the blackboard light but firm, her footsteps steady and resolute. And the Hollow watched her go, not with suspicion or fear, but with a burgeoning sense of wonder, a collective feeling that something extraordinary had entered their lives, a silent promise of a future yet to be written. The air shimmered with unspoken possibilities, carried on the gentle breeze that stirred the newly awakened fields. It had been 3 days since the wheat bloomed behind her. The field was still full, still golden, still thriving in unnatural abundance. Wolves visited it like a shrine, some reverent, some uncertain, some whispering old names meant for things not quite mortal. And still, Wren said nothing. Not to the pack. Not even to Asa. But she no longer flinched when they looked at her. Asa stood in the center of the clearing as the sun dipped behind the tree line. The fire pit glowed low and wide, drawing the entire pack together under a sky veiled in pink and fading gold. Mistleaf stood to his left. The elders, cloaked in woven furs and silence, sat nearby. Duran his second watched from the fringe with arms crossed, gaze sharp but not hostile. Wren stood beside Asa, blackboard cradled in her arms, wrapped in a soft wool cloak Mistleaf had given her days ago. The wool was warm against her skin, a gentle pressure that grounded her as a faint tremor ran through her hands. The weight of the blackboard felt substantial, a tangible representation of her own story, her voice. The air hung thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, mingling with the smoky aroma of the fire. It pricked at her nostrils, a reminder of the wildness that surrounded her. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a counterpoint to the stillness she attempted to project. The pack was quiet, waiting. Asa's voice was steady when he finally spoke. "Some of you have seen what she can do," he said, not raising his voice he never needed to. "Others have only heard the stories. About the flowers, the wheat, the robins in midwinter. You've watched the forest change around her." He looked out at them. No dramatics, just the truth. "I don't have an explanation for it. Not yet. But I know this. She's not here by accident. And she's not a danger." A few heads dipped, a few eyes narrowed. She didn't ask for this power. She doesn't use it to command, threaten, or even speak. She's here because she needed peace, that's all. He glanced at her then, just briefly, and something in his eyes softened. He was proud of her. Asa admired her resilience, the quiet strength she radiated even in the face of their pack's scrutiny. He saw the subtle ways she was healing, the way her shoulders were no longer permanently hunched, the flicker of curiosity that now danced in her eyes. He knew this simple act, this offering of her name, took courage she barely knew she possessed. A faint smile touched his lips at the thought of her. Finally, truly belonging here. She has it now, and she has us. Murmurs flickered around the clearing, but no one interrupted. Asa turned slightly, opened his hand toward her, not pushing her forward, but offering the space if she wanted it. And Wren stepped into it, just one step. The earth beneath her bare feet felt cool and yielding, a stark contrast to the heat rising from the fire pit. A shiver ran down her spine, a mixture of fear and anticipation. The eyes of the pack were on her, assessing, questioning. It was all she could do to keep her hands from shaking. That was all. But it was hers. She looked out at the gathered wolves, some curious, some cautious, all of them awaiting. Slowly, she raised the blackboard. The rough wood scraped slightly against her fingertips. The cool night air raised goosebumps on her arms. Her throat felt tight, constricted, but she focused on the letters before her, the simple declaration she had painstakingly written. And written across it in clean, even strokes, "My name is Wren." Not an introduction, not an explanation, just a truth, her truth, and it was enough. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was weighted, a pause held by 100 hearts all quietly shifting. No one applauded, no one bowed, but wolves began to nod, slowly. Not in agreement, in recognition, as if, for the first time, the hollow had spoken back. Afterward, no one crowded her. Asa didn't ask how she felt. Mistleaf only squeezed her hand as she passed and whispered, "Well done, little blossom." And when Wren returned to Asa's side at the edge of the clearing, he didn't say anything either. He just walked her home, through flowers that now bloomed without permission. Mistleaf had lived through 4 alphas, 3 border wars, and 2 harsh famines. She had seen wolves rise and fall, She had watched mates die in childbirth and rogues die in mercy. She had soothed bodies too broken to keep fighting, and taught younglings how to listen to the earth when their parents taught them only to fight it. But she had never not once seen flowers bloom beneath someone's feet. Until Wren, the old healer, moved slowly through the nursery that morning, a heavy stillness hanging in the air with the stifling heat. The scent was overwhelming, a cloying sweetness layered with the earthy tang of herbs, the sharp metallic odor of sickness, and the faint, sour smell of fear clinging to the air like a shroud. The heat radiating from the feverish pups was stifling, thick enough to taste. Fingers trailing across shelves lined with stone jars and dried bundles, Wren was a silent force in the room. Everything in this space had been gathered, crushed, and mixed by her hand. This was her kingdom root, and flame and leaf. She set the tea to steep, then pulled an old wooden chest from beneath the low cot. It smelled like age and dust, and the inside of stories. She opened it. Inside were texts she hadn't touched in years. Soft leather journals passed from one healer to the next. Not records of medicine, but of memory. Things not spoken out loud, because wolves forgot how to listen. She found it on the 7th page of a binding wrapped in ash cloth. Lunar spirit. She who walks with life, who carries the breath of the first wolf mother. No voice, but the world answers her anyway. Miss Leaf sat back on her heels, lips tight, breath slow. Asa arrived before nightfall. He didn't knock. She never made him. "You've seen the wheat," she said before he could speak. He nodded once. "And the birds. And the trees." She gestured to the journal, open now across the long table between them. He stepped closer, reading the brittle page in silence. "It's not just nature," Miss Leaf said. "The lunar spirit isn't some forest charm. It's something older than memory. She carries balance, renewal, restoration, but also endings." He looked at her. "Endings?" Miss Leaf turned another page. The illustration was rough charcoal lines of a woman surrounded by wolves. Some were howling, others lay curled, still, at her feet. It said lunar spirits can undo rot, disease, even death, if it's near enough to pull back. But they can also call it when it's time. They don't just heal, they decide when healing stops. Asa was silent for a long moment. He thought of the pups, too weak to lift their heads, their breaths rattling in their tiny chests. He thought of Wren, her face pale with exhaustion, radiating a quiet intensity as she worked tirelessly. He watched her work alongside the pups, her hands moving across their bodies. A golden glow began to emit from her hands, and with each passing moment, the light grew stronger and brighter. "And you think it's her?" Miss Leaf met his gaze. "She doesn't just wake the land, Asa. She doesn't speak, but the hollow listens. She dreams of ash and bloom. She brings rebirth in her silence. If she isn't a lunar spirit," she closed the journal softly, "then nothing we've believed matters anymore." Asa stood for a while, saying nothing. A knot of anxiety tightened in his chest, a mixture of fear and awe. He felt a strange pull towards Wren, a sense of protectiveness he hadn't experienced before. He wanted to rush to her side, to shield her from the weight of this revelation. But he knew he couldn't. He had to let her be, let her discover her truth. He watched the pups, slowly but surely, the sickly pallor fading from their fur, their breaths growing stronger. A surge of hope, sharp and unexpected, flooded him. He found himself blinking back tears, overwhelmed by the raw, primal power he was witnessing. "Does she know?" Miss Leaf shook her head. "Not yet, and not from me. Let her become it before we name it for her. And the pack? Let them believe what they will. What she is will show itself." That night, Miss Leaf walked alone to the edge of the wheat field, just to see it again. The wind was calm. The stalks shimmered like gold in the moonlight. And in the center of the field, untouched but unmistakable, A wide circle had bloomed woven with wildflowers that had no name in this part of the world. She smiled, just faintly. "Little blossom," she whispered to the wind, "you don't know what you are yet, but the world does." It began with a forest of white trees, their branches skeletal and stark against a pale sky. White grass, brittle beneath an unseen wind. The sky was pale as bone, devoid of sun or cloud, casting an ethereal, almost ghostly light across the landscape. Wren walked barefoot, though she couldn't feel the ground beneath her feet. The air was thin and cold, yet she felt no chill. The silence here was completed deeper even than her own. It pressed in on her, a suffocating blanket that muffled every thought, every instinct. Nothing breathed, nothing stirred, until she saw the woman. She stood beneath a massive tree, its trunk wider than any Wren had ever seen. The bark was a tapestry of deep ridges and swirling patterns, and carved into its surface were glyphs-worn shapes Wren couldn't read, but somehow knew. They seemed to hum with a forgotten power, resonating deep within her bones. The woman had silver hair, braided with feathers that whispered secrets only the wind could understand. Her skin was the color of sunlit stone, smooth and cool to the touch, etched with the faint lines of a life lived in harmony with the earth. And her eyes, they were so dark they swallowed the world, pools of endless night that seemed to hold the secrets of the universe. She was not young, her face bore the gentle map of time, but not old either. Her spirit radiated the strength of a primal force. She was everything in between, a bridge between worlds, a guardian of forgotten knowledge, the first wolf mother. Wren didn't know how she knew it. She just did. The woman extended a hand, not commanding, just open, inviting. Her hand was strong, calloused yet soft, the skin like weathered leather infused with warmth. Wren noted the lines that crisscrossed her palm, each one a story etched by time and fate. When she took that hand, a jolt of energy surged through her, a connection to something ancient and powerful. The silence was shattered, and in its place came whispers rising from the trees, a rustling chorus of ancient voices. From the sky, a celestial symphony of long-forgotten songs. From the stone beneath her feet, a grounding hum of unwavering strength. You are the blossom from ash. You are the breath that follows stillness. You are the balance, born again in silence. You are mine. Wren woke in darkness, heart pounding like a trapped bird. The cabin was still. The fire had burned low, casting faint golden ribbons across the floorboards, painting the rough-hewn wood with a warm, inviting glow. She pushed the quilt back carefully, toes brushing the cool floor. No sound, no rush, just the gentle pull to move, an undeniable urge drawing her towards the outside world. She slid on her coat, the familiar weight comforting against her skin, and stepped outside. The night air was cold, a sharp kiss against her cheeks, but soft, pine-heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and ancient trees. Alive. She stepped off the porch into the grass, her breath catching in her throat as her bare feet touched the ground. The earth responded instantly. A wave of blossoms unfolded beneath her, souls white as moonlight, blue as a twilight sky, and soft gold like captured sunlight. Petals opened like small hearts, each one a perfect, delicate creation. Moss was thickened, green, and plush, forming a soft carpet beneath her feet. The air shimmered faintly around her legs, as if the very night was celebrating her presence. She froze, not in fear, but in awe. Her hands trembled as she looked down at what the earth had done for her. Because of her, it was a symphony of color and texture, a vibrant, breathing tapestry woven just for her. The moonlight bathed the scene in an ethereal glow, turning the clearing into a sacred space, a testament to the power that resided within her. A sound behind her made her flinch. She turned sharply, startled, but it was only Asa, leaning against the porch post, his expression unreadable in the dim light. He had followed her, quiet as ever, a silent guardian watching over her awakening. "You saw her," he said softly, his voice barely a whisper in the stillness of the night. Wren didn't move. Her throat tightened. She looked down at the flowers again, a myriad of colors dancing in the moonlight, then back to him. And then, just like always, she reached for the blackboard strapped at her hip. She wrote slowly. Was it real? Asa stepped off the porch and walked toward her. Careful, slow, as if not to startle a wild creature. His movements were deliberate and measured. Yes, he said simply, his gaze unwavering. He crouched beside the trail of blooms, fingers brushing across one, his touch gentle and reverent. These flowers don't grow here, not naturally. And the glyphs you've been sketching in your sleep, Miss Leaf, says they're markings from the old tongue. She looked down again, pressed the chalk to the board. What am I? Asa stood, meeting her eyes, his dark gaze filled with a mixture of understanding and concern. You're descended from the first wolf mother, he said. Your blood carries the old root what they once called the lunar spirit. You don't channel life, Wren. You are life. You restore. You awaken. You balance. Wren's hands shook harder. The chalk nearly fell from her grip. She erased the board. Wrote again. I don't know what to do. He stepped closer, still not touching her, respecting the invisible boundaries she had erected around herself. You don't have to know yet. You only have to listen. To the earth. To your instincts. He paused, his voice softening. To me, when it gets too heavy. Her breath hitched. Her shoulders curled inward, the same small way they always had when the world got too loud, too overwhelming. And then she did something she hadn't done since that first day. She reached for him. Slow. Timid. Her fingers brushed his sleeve. Not clinging. Just steadying. A silent plea for support. Asa didn't move. Didn't speak. But he stayed right there until she let go. His presence a silent anchor in the storm raging within her. When they walked back toward the cabin, Wren's steps stirred more than grass. Vines curled over stones, weaving intricate patterns in the earth. Flowers reached toward her calves, their petals brushing against her skin like silken kisses. The night whispered in a language no one had taught her, but that she somehow remembered, a symphony of forgotten knowledge resonating within her very being. And behind her, Asa followed without question, his loyalty unwavering. Because he knew now, more than ever, Wren was not meant to roar. She was meant to bloom. The illness in the nursery was gaining traction fast. Panic was a tangible thing, a suffocating blanket, woven from fear and desperation. Miss Leaf had seen fevers before, blistering heat that scorched the skin, rattle coughs that echoed like death knells, the slow, agonizing drain of breath. But this was different. It didn't linger. It struck. It spread like a wildfire, whipped by malevolent winds, and struck like a viper's poison. By the second day, 3 pups had collapsed in the nursery den, their small bodies limp and unresponsive. 2 more coughed up blood, staining the blankets with a horrifying crimson. A mother had gone pale, her eyes wide with terror as she watched her child succumb. One healer's apprentice, her face green with nausea and fear, vomited in the hallway before she could even finish boiling the fever root, the precious herbal remedy sloshing uselessly on the floor. And still, the sickness deepened, tightening its grip on the vulnerable pack members. Miss Leaf worked with frantic, tight hands, and a breath held so rigidly, it ached in her chest. She said nothing, but Asa saw it in her eyes. The stark realization that they were losing the fight, that the sickness was winning. Wren noticed the change before anyone spoke a word to her. She watched the wolves pass the cabin with hunched shoulders, their tails tucked low, a silent testament to their despair. She heard the urgency in the frantic footfalls across the frozen path. The hurried whispers carried on the biting wind. She saw Miss Leaf come and go without a word, her arms laden with roots and jars, her face etched with exhaustion and worry. No one told her what was wrong. They didn't need to. The air itself hummed with dread. That evening, she stepped quietly into Asa's study, while he was lacing his boots for another round of patrols, his jaw tight with grim determination. He looked up, surprised, his eyes reflecting the flickering lamplight. She didn't raise the blackboard at first. She just stood there, framed in the doorway, small, steady, a beacon of quiet resolve in the storm of anxiety. Then she stepped forward, the floorboards creaking softly beneath her weight, and wrote one sentence: "Take me to the sick." He stared at the words, his brow furrowing in confusion and concern. "Wren, you don't have to." He hesitated, unsure how to express the fear that gnawed at him. He wanted to protect her, but he also recognized the unwavering strength in her eyes. She pointed to the board, her finger a steady line against the wood, not demanding, just certain, a quiet plea laced with undeniable purpose. He read it again, his gaze lingering on the simple, powerful words, then looked into her eyes, searching for any sign of fear or hesitation. What he saw there wasn't fear. It was compassion, a deep well of empathy that resonated with the suffering within the nursery. He nodded, a lump forming in his throat, stood and reached for his coat, the rough wool a familiar comfort. "All right," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "We'll go together." The nursery was stifling warm, wet, and thick with the cloying scent of herbs and the acrid tang of fear. The air hung heavy, a suffocating blanket of sickness and despair. Blankets lay rumpled and damp across small, feverish bodies. Pups whimpered and moaned in their sleep, their tiny forms twitching with discomfort. One mother knelt beside her daughter, her face pale and drawn, whispering promises she couldn't keep, her voice laced with desperation. Miss Leaf didn't look up when they entered, her shoulders slumped with exhaustion. She was too focused on mixing a bitter paste, her hands trembling so violently that the herbs threatened to spill. But her voice shook when she spoke, a barely audible tremor of defeat. "It's worse. I can't slow it down." Wren stepped forward slowly, her eyes scanning the room, taking in the scene of suffering with a heartbreaking intensity. Her breath hitched in her throat at the sight of the smallest pup, barely older than a few moons, gasping softly, his chest rising in weak, shallow shudders. His fur was dull, his eyes unfocused. Her hands trembled. The enormity of the task before her threatened to overwhelm her. Asa stepped beside her and, without a word, took her hands in his. Warm, still, sure. His presence was a grounding force, a silent reassurance that she wasn't alone. She didn't look at him, but she held tighter, drawing strength from his unwavering support. He didn't let go. Not until she let go first, the moment she steeled herself, her resolve hardening. Then she moved forward, her eyes fixed on the struggling pup. She knelt beside the pup, carefully placing her hands on his chest. The moment her skin touched his fur, the air itself seemed to crackle with energy. Her magic didn't pour, it bloomed, unfolding like a delicate flower in the heart of winter, quiet, full. A soft breeze, carrying the scent of wildflowers and spring rain, passed through the den, stirring the air and lifting the heavy pall of sickness. The herbs on the shelves, withered and drooping just moments before, curled toward her, drawn to the source of healing. The fire, which had been spitting and hissing erratically, cracked once, a sharp, resounding report, and then stilled, burning, with a steady, unwavering flame. Miss Leaf's breath caught in her throat, her eyes widening in disbelief, as the pup's fever broke in a single, shuddering exhale. The heat that had radiated from his small body dissipated, leaving behind a cool, calm stillness. Color returned to his face, flushing his cheeks with a healthy, rosy hue. The child whimpered once, a weak, fragile sound, but it was a sound of life, of recovery. His mother choked back a sob, tears streaming down her face as she clutched her child close, her heart overflowing with gratitude. And Wren, still silent, still trembling from the exertion of her magic, moved on, drawn to the next pup in need. She healed the next, and then another, her touch bringing relief and restoration to each ravaged body. Each time, she looked at Asa first, her eyes questioning, seeking his silent approval, his unwavering support. Just a glance, a question, and every time, he nodded, his eyes filled with pride and admiration, and stayed close, a silent guardian, a bulwark against the darkness that threatened to consume them all. By nightfall, no one was dying. The frantic whimpers had subsided, replaced by the soft, contented sighs of sleeping pups. Fevers had broken, and the air was no longer thick with the stench of sickness. Mothers clutched their children close, their faces wet with tears of relief and gratitude. Miss Leaf sat back on her heels, her shoulders slumped with exhaustion, her hands shaking with the after effects of the long, harrowing day. But her eyes shone with wonder and hope. Wren stood in the doorway, her arms folded around herself, her blackboard tucked under one arm like a shield she didn't need anymore. The exhaustion was etched on her face, but there was a quiet strength in her stance, a knowledge of her power. She looked at Asa, her silent gratitude radiating towards him. He stepped forward and rested a hand gently on her shoulder, his touch a silent affirmation of her worth. "They'll remember this," he said softly, his voice filled with emotion. "They'll remember you." And they did. The next morning, when Wren stepped outside the cabin, a group of wolves waited along the path, not in judgment, as she had once feared, in gratitude, in awe. One, a grizzled old hunter with kind eyes, handed her a woven bracelet of bark and pine thread, a symbol of protection and belonging. Another, a young mother with tears still clinging to her fur, gave her a jar of honey from the spring stores, a precious offering of sweetness and healing. A young scout, barely more than a pup himself, offered her a bone-carved pendant shaped like a crescent moon, a symbol of hope and guidance in the darkness. No one demanded she speak. They didn't need to hear her voice to understand the depth of her compassion. They only said, "Thank you. You saved my son. My sister owes her life to you. We were wrong to fear you. You're part of us now." Wren didn't write anything. She didn't have to. Her actions had spoken louder than any words ever could. She simply nodded once, her heart swelling with a mixture of humility and belonging. And when Asa stepped up beside her, his presence a silent promise of unwavering support, she reached out slowly, quietly, and took his hand in front of everyone, a gesture of trust and acceptance that resonated deeply within the pack. The pack bowed their heads, not in submission, but in respect, in gratitude. In recognition of the extraordinary gift she had given them, they came at dusk. No horns shattered the twilight, no chilling howls announced their arrival, just flames in the distance, licking at the horizon behind the pine ridge like a second, burning sunset, a sunset born of malice. Then shapes materialized from the encroaching darkness, half-shadowed wolves, wild-eyed with bloodlust, moving with unnatural speed. The air, thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, suddenly reeked of wood smoke and something feral, a musky, acrid odor that made Wren's stomach churn. The first arrow, a hissing whisper through the air, struck the watchtower with a sickening thud. The second was buried deep in the dry timber of the main longhouse, a spark of impending doom. By the time the alarm sounded, a ragged, desperate cry that was swallowed almost immediately by the growing roar of the blaze. It was already too late. Asa was in the southern quarter, near the well, when the first wolf broke through the tree line. The creature, teeth bared in a silent snarl, held a sputtering torch clenched between its jaws, dripping burning pitch onto the snow. He barely had time to draw his blade. the cold steel a familiar comfort in his grasp. Before the rogue lunged, steel met fur in a screech of metal on bone. A guttural snarl, cut short. Blood hit the snow, staining the pristine white, a gruesome crimson. "They're here!" someone shrieked, the voice cracking with terror. "We're under attack!" The hollow exploded into a horrific ballet of motion and chaos. Mothers, faces etched with primal fear, fled toward the stone shelters, clutching children to their chests. Warriors shouted orders, their voices strained and desperate, trying to rally a defense against the onslaught. Fire, greedy and ravenous, leapt from rooftops like starving wolves, catching on old timber and thatched straw with terrifying ease. The crackling flames, a symphony of destruction, mixed with the panicked screams of the villagers. Wren stood frozen on the porch of Asa's cabin, the heat of the approaching inferno prickling her skin. Her cloak slipped from her shoulders, unnoticed, unheeded. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The scent of burning wood and blood filled her nostrils, suffocating her. Then she saw him, Asa, fighting with a grim determination, holding his ground near the well. 3 rogues circled him, their movements a predatory dance. One already lay broken and still in the snow. Another was bleeding profusely, fur-matted and dark. But the third taller, broader, a hulking brute, charged with a wickedly curved blade meant for killing, not merely threatening. The glint of steel in the firelight made her heart leap into her throat. Wren's hand went to her chest, clutching the crystal beneath her tunic. "Please," she thought, a silent, desperate plea rising from the depths of her soul. "Please don't fall." Asa dodged the first strike, the blade whistling past his ear. He blocked the second with a clang of steel, the force of the blow jarring his arm. But the third caught him in the cedar, sickening rip of fabric and flesh, a flash of red across his ribs. He staggered, a gasp escaping his lips. Wren ran, her bare feet pounding against the frozen ground, ignoring the biting cold. Joran was screaming orders from atop the main stairs, his voice a desperate roar above the din. "Get the pups into the cellar! Burn the passage behind them if you have to!" Miss Leaf, her face pale but resolute, was at the infirmary threshold, thrusting jars and poultices into the arms of a trembling apprentice. "Forget the herb steak, the coagulants. We'll need them. Gods help us. We'll need gallons." And then the western storage house burst into flame, a deafening explosion that sent a shower of sparks and burning debris into the air. The wolves of Iron Hollow howled, a chorus of rage and defiance that echoed the despair in Wren's own heart. The fight had begun. Wren reached Asa as he knelt, his face contorted in pain, blood blooming like a dark flower through his side. She dropped to her knees beside him, the rough ice digging into her skin, fingers already glowing with a faint, ethereal light, trying desperately to stem the bleeding. The pulsing heat of her magic was a small comfort against the overwhelming terror that threatened to consume her. His breath hitched, ragged and shallow, but he kept his eyes locked on hers, a silent promise flickering within their depths. "Behind you!" he rasped, his voice strained and weak. She turned, her heart pounding in her chest. Too slow, a rogue barreled toward her, mouth open in a grotesque snarl, teeth gleaming like sharpened daggers in the firelight. She braced for the impact, the certainty of pain, a cold dread in her stomach. But Joran hit him mid-charge, a whirlwind of fury and muscle, slamming the wolf into the dirt with a roar that echoed across the clearing, shaking the very ground beneath their feet. "She stays alive," Joran growled, his voice a menacing rumble. "If I have to kill every damn rogue in this forsaken forest to make it happen." More fires erupted, painting the scene in hellish hues of orange and red. Screams pierced the air, a cacophony of agony and fear. Smoke, thick and acrid, turned the sky black, obscuring the stars. But they were holding for now. Asa gritted his teeth, fighting against the pain, and stood, Wren reached for him again, her eyes pleading, but he waved her back gently, a sad smile tugging at his lips. "I'm all right," he said, though his voice betrayed him. "There's more coming. Go with Miss Leaf. Help those you can." She didn't want to. The thought of leaving him, even for a moment, filled her with a paralyzing dread. He saw it in her eyes, the unspoken fear, the desperate plea to stay. But she nodded, her throat tight with unshed tears, because it was him, Asa, the core of her being. And because it was what she could do, the only way she could contribute to this nightmare unfolding around them. Healing, she knew, was her only weapon now. It was supposed to be a final push. The rogue wolves were thinning. 5 lifeless bodies already stained the square crimson, and 2 more were teetering on the ridge, their footing unsure. The iron-hollow wolves fought with a desperate ferocity, slowly but surely driving the remaining rogues toward the edge of the tree line. Then, the scream pierced the air. High-pitched, raw, a sound that ripped through the fray. It wasn't the cry of pain, but the shrill shriek of pure, unadulterated panic. Miss Leaf, at the forefront of the battle, turned first. Her experienced eyes immediately grasped the situation. One of the rogues had slipped past their defenses, exploiting a weakness along the far western trail. He had infiltrated the old nursery corridor, a place meant for new life, now a scene of impending death. A mother and her pup were cornered in the wreckage of the tool shed, their eyes wide with terror, trapped with no means of escape. Miss Leaf didn't hesitate. Her instincts, honed by years of leadership and countless battles, took over. She ran, her aged body moving with surprising speed, fueled by a singular purpose. Wren, only steps behind, a healing pouch heavy across her chest, saw the elder's desperate sprint. "Miss Leaf!" she cried out, but nothing came past her lips. The elder didn't stop, her focus unwavering on the impending tragedy. She reached the mother just as the rogue lunged, its muscular body a blur of predatory intent. Without a moment's thought, Miss Leaf threw herself into its path, sacrificing her safety for the sake of others. The sound that followed was sickening, like a wet cloth tearing, followed by the sharp crack of splintering bone. Miss Leaf hit the ground in a crumpled heap of robes, her throat ripped open, blood gushing onto the rich earth. Wren screamed, a silent scream that clawed at her throat, unable to escape. No sound emerged, only ragged breaths and the unbearable weight of mounting pain. The rogue, momentarily stunned, turned its blood-slicked jaws toward Wren next. It took 2 steps, snarling, its eyes burning with savage intent. Before the earth itself responded, the ground exploded in a violent eruption. Vines, thick as pythons, burst from the soil, lashing out with terrifying speed. Roots, gnarled and ancient, shot upwards like spears, impaling the air. The surrounding trees groaned in protest, their branches twisting in unnatural ways. Blossoms, vibrant moments before, withered and blackened in an instant, their delicate petals crumbling to ash as the hollow awakened, its fury unleashed. The rogue shrieked, a strangled cry of terror as it realized its fate, but it was already too late. Nature, awakened and enraged, swallowed him whole. Twisted vines dragged him down into the earth, roots pierced his flesh, and the very soil seemed to constrict around him, silencing his screams. Wren, numb with grief and horror, ran to Miss Leaf. She dropped to her knees beside the fallen elder, her fingers trembling as she desperately fumbled for a healing salve. But there was nothing left to save. The elder's eyes stared blankly past her, fixed on some distant point beyond the veil of death. Her mouth remained open in a silent warning, a final act of defense, a testament to her unwavering love for her pack. Wren's hands shook uncontrollably, the pouch slipping from her grasp and spilling its contents uselessly onto the blood-soaked ground. Asa, His own body, bloodied and bruised from the battle, stumbled toward her, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He stopped when he saw her face, her eyes wide with a grief that seemed to swallow her whole. "Wren," he began, his voice laced with concern, but the words died in his throat. She stood up, her movements jerky and uncoordinated, as if she were a puppet with severed strings. She backed away from Miss Leaf's lifeless form, her body trembling from head to toe. Her gaze darted around the square, taking in the carnage, the flickering flames of the burning fires, the pools of blood staining the earth, the mangled bodies of the fallen rogues, and finally, the still, silent form of Miss Leaf. And then she broke. She stepped into the center of the square, oblivious to the chaos that surrounded her. Fires burned around her, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to mock her pain. Wolves sobbed openly, their grief echoing her own, while others called her name, their voices laced with worry and fear. But she didn't hear them, didn't react, didn't breathe. She collapsed where she stood, her knees hitting the earth with a dull thud. Her hands flew to her head, her fingers tangling in her hair, as if trying to contain the explosion of grief within. She folded inward, her body contorting in on itself, like a flower closing against the onslaught of a violent storm, and the hollow fell silent. The fires crackled softly, the wind stilled, and even the sobbing of the wolves faded into a muted hush. From the ground, a new surge of power emerged. Vines, thick as tree trunks, rose from the earth, their tendrils reaching out with unnatural precision. Branches twisted and bent, shaping themselves into deadly weapons. The world seemed to open up, revealing its raw, untamed power. One rogue, still twitching in his death throes, was impaled by a branch that pierced his chest, pinning him to the earth like a grotesque trophy. Another was ensnared in a vice-like grip of roots, his body lifted from the ground and pulled down into the depths of the earth, disappearing without a trace. The earth kept moving, a silent, relentless force, wiping the remaining rogues from existence, until nothing remained but the evidence of their intrusion. Then, the earth softened. Wren stood shaking, and the earth wrapped the dead wolves from the pack into cocoons and suspended them above the compound. Wren collapsed on the ground. Asa rushed forward and carried her to the cabin. Spring arrived differently that year. It didn't come gently, with a hesitant thaw and shy green shoots. It surged, a riot of awakened energy. The trees budded early, swollen with promise, their papery husks releasing the sweet, sappy scent of new life. The wind, usually sharp with winter's bite, carried a gentle warmth even before the last frost fell, hinting at sun-drenched days to come. Birds returned before the snow had fully melted, their cheerful songs a vibrant soundtrack to the earth's awakening. And across Iron Hollow, life didn't just resumate woke. From everywhere, and all at once, the thick, earthy aroma of damp soil mingled with the heady perfume of blossoming flowers, a potent elixir that filled the air. The first cocoon opened on the 22nd morning after the attack. It happened just after sunrise, as the sky bled with hues of rose and gold. A tremble ran through the roots around the central hearth, a deep, resonant hum that vibrated through the very ground beneath their paws. Wolves gathering water at the creek paused, their ears twitching, eyes wide, as the bark silk layer peeled back from one figure curled in the green, revealing a glimpse of fur and limb. The body inside took a breath, a loud, gasping, living breath, filled with the wonder of being. And then another cocoon opened, the sound like the rustling of silk in the breeze. And another. By midday, 6 wolves had returned, blinking in the newly bright sunlight. The wounds that had seemed fatal were gone, replaced by smooth, unbroken fur. The memories of the attack were blurred, like half-remembered nightmares fading with the dawn. Their eyes were wide, blinking in the sunlight like they had been dreaming inside the earth, struggling to reconcile the darkness they remembered with the vibrant reality around them. The hollow gathered in a wide circle, stunned and silent, a collective intake of breath held suspended in the air. They weren't ghosts, they were back, but one cocoon hadn't moved. Not yet. The one at the center, wrapped in the thickest bloom, guarded by layers of gold thread moss and snow-colored petals, it remained stubbornly closed. Wren sat in front of it every morning, as the sun painted the glade with shifting light. She didn't speak, afraid to break the delicate silence. She didn't cry, her tears having long run dry. She just waited, hands folded, posture still, eyes fixed on the unyielding petals. Asa stood behind her, a silent pillar of strength, watching, knowing with huge pride that 6 wolves had returned from the dead because of her unwavering faith and courage. He stood as a silent sentinel, shielding her from the well-meaning but stifling concern of the pack, while she waited for Miss Leaf's return. And then, on the 24th day, it bloomed. The petals peeled back like opening hands, revealing the gentle curve of a snout, the soft gleam of fur. The vines released with a whisper, falling away like shed tears. And Miss Leaf, healer of Iron Hollow, keeper of herbs and old stories, breathed. Her chest rose and fell with a slow, steady rhythm, her head tilted to the sun, her face bathed in its radiant warmth. And when her eyes opened, the first thing they saw was Wren. Time seemed to stop. Miss Leaf sat up slowly, her hands uncurling from her lap, with a grace learned over centuries. She blinked once, twice. Then her face broke into a smile, like a morning after a long night, chasing away the shadows with its gentle light. "Little Blossom," she whispered, her voice raspy but overflowing with affection. Wren's lips parted. A very soft, strangled cry came from her soul, a sound of pure, unadulterated relief that had been building within her for weeks. It made her breath hitch, her vision blur with a rush of tears. She launched herself forward, abandoning all pretense of composure, and ran straight into Miss Leaf's arms. She clung to her, burying her face in her neck, the scent of chamomile and wood smoke filling her senses, a tangible reminder of everything she had almost lost. The sobs that racked her body were not of sadness, but of a profound and overwhelming joy, a release of pent-up fear and anxiety. Miss Leaf held her close, stroking her hair soothingly and whispering words of comfort and love into her ear. Miss Leaf looked over Wren's shoulder and gave a warm, homecoming smile towards Asa, acknowledging his steadfast support and unwavering faith. The hollow didn't cheer. It didn't need to. It simply exhaled, a collective sigh of relief that resonated through the trees and across the valley. And in that breath, every wolf knew. Wren was no longer the girl the forest had found, lost and alone. She was the bloom it had waited for, the embodiment of resilience and hope, the heart of Iron Hollow made strong, the true leader of their future. That's the end of this tale. But in the world of the supernatural, there's always another shadow waiting. Thank you for staying with me through every twist, turn, and heartbeat. If you enjoyed the ride, there's more waiting for you. Just check out the other audiobooks on this channel. Don't forget to subscribe if you want more magic, monsters, and stories that go bump in the night. Until next time, stay curious and brave and never stop listening.